All right, we're looking at simplify and evaluate expressions. And keep in mind here, when you're watching this video for Chapter 2, this is the basic level of simplifying and evaluating expressions. As we move on in the year, we will add to this skill. We'll look at adding in something called absolute value. If you remember what that is, fantastic. We'll also start looking at the laws of exponents and how we can use the laws of exponents to help us to simplify expressions when we don't know the value of a variable. All right, so for this case right here, we are going to be given an expression every single time, and you're going to be given the values of the variable every single time. We're simply asking you to insert or substitute that value of the variable in to the expression and then to evaluate it to see what the value of that expression is. This is useful for several reasons. When you get to formulas in physics and other things, you can plug those in. It's useful in equations when you need to find a value of another variable. If you know one variable, for example, we often use y equals mx plus b. If we know the slope m, if we know the value of x, if we know the y-intercept, we can plug those in and we can find y as a result. We also use this to check our answers to equations. Anytime you get a solution to an equation, you should always check your answer to the equation by plugging the solution you got for the variable and plugging it back in for that variable to make sure that it does indeed make both sides equal, because the solution to an equation is the value of a variable that makes the equation true, or makes one side of the equation equal to the other. And when we plug it back in, we can see that. So that's the value of this skill. Let's now talk about how to do it. Let's start off with number 1 here. In number 1, they tell us that s is equal to -3. I'm simply going to come back into my expression. I'm going to replace s with parentheses and insert -3. Now you kind of can't see it there, so I'm going to rewrite it. But I always put parentheses where the variable was and insert the value of that variable. Then everything else written stays the exact same. Now from here, you can plug things into your calculator and go from there, but it could be a little bit of a challenge because we need to make sure that this top is added first. So if you want to use your calculator, there's 2 ways to do it. Either add the top and then hit equals, then hit divide by -1, or if you want to make sure that it adds the top first, you could insert it like this into your calculator, parentheses for the top, then parentheses -3, parentheses, and then plus -7. Notice I added an extra set of parentheses there before I hit divide by -1 because I wanted to make sure that the calculator would add the top first, because all those pieces up top need to go down to one number before we can get there. Now that's the calculator route. You could hit equals, you'll get it. That's a great way to check it. But I encourage you to work it out by hand. Work it out in your head. Make sure that what you plugged in the calculator matches what you got by hand, because when you get it 2 ways, you'll know that you got it correct. All right, so this case we got 10 if we hit equals. Let's do it by hand. -3 plus -7, well, that's going to result in a -10 divided by -1. -10 divided by -1 is a positive 10. There we go. All right, all good. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Now we know x is 3, so I'm going to write my expression exactly as I see it until I get to x. When I get to x, I'm going to replace x with parentheses, insert the value of x, close my parentheses, then I'm going to continue writing. Notice, in this case here, you can see, in fact, I'm going to rewrite this one last part of it here. I'll put it in a different color so you can clearly see what I put in for x. I'll put this here with a parenthesis, 3, parenthesis, and then I'm going to come back to red for the rest because I want you to really pay attention to the fact that we have that 2 parentheses right in a row. One of the parentheses is from the original expression. The green parenthesis is what I put in place of x. Please make sure you get the correct number of parentheses if you're going to be using your calculator. Otherwise, it will get it wrong. So please make sure you're paying attention to that. If this case here, I work it out by hand, I follow my order of operations. I do inside the parentheses first, and inside my parentheses, I will do multiplication before addition and subtraction. -4 times -3 is a -12. And then I like to change that -12. In other words, the opposite of 12 is plus 12. And 3 plus 12 is 15. All right, and then 15 squared. If you don't have it memorized in your calculator, I encourage you to memorize up to 20 squared. But if you don't, you can use your calculator, and we get 225. So that's working it out by hand. If we were to plug this straight into the calculator, you should get 225. However, I'm going to show this in a different color. If you messed up with our parentheses and you did this, If you plug that into your calculator, you will get the wrong answer. Why? Because it's now squaring the 3 only. 3 squared is 9, then it will do 9 times negative 4, and then it will do 3 minus that result. All right, so it's going to do things in a little bit of a different order, and that's going to really mess with you. So please make sure you're careful with your parentheses. That's the most challenging aspect of this skill. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Next one's a little simple. W is negative 1, so let's plug it in. So I'm going to insert parentheses where W is, insert negative 1 plus negative 7. Negative 1 plus negative 7 is negative 8 altogether. Let's take a look at the next one. Negative 4V when V is negative 7 and C is negative 2. Now we've got two things being plugged in. So again, negative 4 is up top. I'm going to put parentheses where V was and insert the negative 7. Over C, I'm going to put parentheses where C was, negative 2. End your parentheses squared outside. We are squaring the negative 2. We do not want the squared inside the parentheses because the squared is not the value of C. Only the value of your variable goes inside the parentheses. Everything else should be outside your parentheses. Now let's go ahead and do this. If we look at this, I'm going to work sideways here just for room on the page. Negative 4 times negative 7 is a positive 28. Over negative 2 squared. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Remember, negatives make things the opposite. So when you have a negative times a negative, the negative makes the other negative the opposite, giving you a positive. All right. In this case, 28 divided by 4 is 7. That's what we end up with. All right. So as you keep going, we've got more examples here. I'm going to encourage you, if you're watching and you're really getting it at this point, try to pause in front of each of these questions to see if you can answer it first and then check to see if you got the right result. Let's take a look at our next one, number 3 down here. Negative 5D plus negative 6 times U minus 3. D is 2, U is 7. So again, I'm going to write it exactly as I see it. Negative 5, I get to a variable D, put parentheses where that variable was, and my parentheses with its value inserted inside. Continue writing, so that's plus and then negative 6. I get to another variable, so insert parentheses, insert the value of that variable, and your parentheses, minus 3. You can plug that entire thing straight into your calculator. It will give you the right answer if you type it just as you see it here. Nothing tricky on this one, no division. But I'm going to work it out by hand as I encourage you to do, and then check it with your calculator. Negative 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. I'm going to multiply those first. At the same time, I'm going to multiply a negative 6 and a negative 7. That gives me a negative 42, and I'm just going to leave that as minus 42. All right, and then minus 3 here. All right, so I have a negative 10, negative 42, negative 3, and altogether I get a negative 55 on that one. All right, you can plug that into your calculator as well to double check it, make sure you're good. Let's look at our next one. This is just a test. Can you square a negative in the calculator? All right, so again, Q gets replaced with parentheses, the value of Q, and parentheses. Then continue writing, which means the squared goes outside. This, plug it into your calculator. You should get 100. All right, I'm encouraging you to plug this one into your calculator because this is where most people mess up. A lot of people, and I'm going to put this in a different color, purple again, a lot of people write this. And if you plug that into your calculator, you will get negative 100. That is not correct here. That, in this case, is wrong. All right, that's not what we're looking for, but that's what the calculator will tell you because it thinks you're saying the opposite of 10 squared. Well, 10 squared is 100. The opposite of that is negative 100. We don't want that. We want negative 10 squared, all right, which is negative 10 times itself, negative 10. All right, and therefore that gives us positive 100. All right, let's take a look at a few more examples. Again, if you feel you're good and you want to stop the video, great, but I'm going to keep going just in case you want more. I'm moving down, so you're going to lose all this work. All right, continuing on here with number 4. All right, this time Q is 7. I'm going to insert Q, so I'm going to start with parentheses 10. I got to Q, so I'm going to put parentheses where Q was, insert its value of 7, and parentheses, and continue on. And this time we have to the 5th. I'll show you how to do that in your calculator. All right, so if we solve this just by hand, you could plug that straight into your calculator as is, but I'm going to work it out by hand, and I'll show you how to do the exponent. Because 10 times 7 is 70. That's pretty simple. 70 minus 4, all right, is going to give me 66. So I'm really looking at 66 to the 5th. To plug that into your calculator, put 66, and you're going to have to use this little caret, like the mountaintop, and then you'll put 5. All right, that little caret can be found just north of the 7 on my calculator, just to the right of the x squared button. All right, it gives us any exponent. That's what it allows us to do. You can put that little symbol. The number that follows is your exponent. When you do this, you will get a value in your calculator. It's a pretty large value, and that's okay. And this is what you get here. So pretty large value. That's bigger than anything I would give you in this case. So that's that one there to the 5th. Let's take a look at the next one. Again, we've got our parentheses 5. I get to b. Replace b with parentheses, the value of b and parentheses. Everything else stays exactly the same. Make sure you get both parentheses at the end, so the squared is done properly. In this case, 5 times 0 is 0, all right, and then the opposite of negative 6 is a positive 6, and 0 plus 6 is 6. That's boiling down my parentheses there, and I end up with simply 6 squared at the very end. All right, 6 squared in this case is going to give me 36. All right, let's look at the next one. 7p, all right, so 7 parentheses where the p was, and I'm going to insert negative 3 plus 5 over negative 5. Now be careful, everything up top must be done first. If you want to type this directly into your calculator, you must start with parentheses for up top. 7 parentheses negative 3 plus 5, and then end those parentheses before hitting divide by negative 5. Otherwise, your calculator won't do everything up top first. All right, I encourage you to work things out by hand, giving you a negative 21 plus 5 over negative 5. Negative 21 plus 5, as you do that one, you get negative 16 over 5. I'm going to go sideways here for a moment. Pardon, I'm running out of room. All right, but negative 16 over negative 5. And negative 16 divided by negative 5 is actually going to give you a decimal here, but it's going to be a positive 3.2. All right, so we should have ended with 3.2. All right, take a look at the next one. Again, if you haven't been pausing these, I do encourage you pause it, do it, and then see how we did it. All right, we've got two variables, negative 4 and 1 coming in. So 6, and then instead of q, I'm going to put parentheses negative 4, minus, and then I've got 1 coming in, parentheses 1. Please be careful when you do those minuses. All right, sometimes people forget to put them or they'll duplicate them. Just be careful with that. All right, again, if you want to put this in straight into your calculator, you need to put parentheses around the entire top. So be careful with that. It would look like this. All right, that would be your top. Divide by 4. You could do that and hit equals, but be careful. I still encourage you, work it out by hand first. All right, in this case, 6 times negative 4 gives me a negative 24 minus 1 over 4. That's where it goes to. All right, and then that's going to give me a negative 25 over 4. And if you divide negative 25 divided by 4, you will get a negative 6.25, or 6 1/4. All right, now let's take a look at this next one, 6. I've got Q and R, Q, R. All right, so I'm going to plug in 1 for Q minus 7 for R minus negative 1. All right, and in this case here, I really can drop this parenthesis for the first one, 1. Minus 7 could just be written like that. Minus negative 1, however, I'm going to change that to plus 1 because, again, negatives make things the opposite. Take a look. The negative made this 7 the opposite. That's why it's a negative 7. The negative made the negative 1 the opposite. That's why it's a plus 1. And in this case here, 1 minus 7 is negative 6. And then plus another 1 is going to give me a negative 5 altogether. All right, take a look at our next one here. I'm going to change this one, actually, because I want to point something out. All right. As we look at this one here, I'm going to actually make this 5 a negative as well. All right, so let me just change this. It's going to be negative 5 for n, because I really want to point out something that messes students up. So in this case here, I'm going to put parentheses, negative 3 parentheses for b, minus, and then some students put just 5 here, but I need a negative 5 in this case, minus a negative, and that's where people mess it up. They sometimes forget when there's two negatives. I have to still put both. The first negative was part of the original expression. The second negative is part of my value of n. All right, so then I'm going to rewrite it. Negative 3, that doesn't change, but the opposite of negative 5 is plus 5, and then minus 8. So in this case here, we have negative 3 plus 5 gives me 2, minus 8 gives me negative 6 altogether. All right, let's see another one that's very, very similar to that down below here, all right, in both of our 7s. So when we've got D, I'm going to put negative 5 out front, all right, in parentheses, and then I'm going to start my parentheses for negative 7, minus S comes in at -2, so I need minus -2, and my parentheses. Again, double parentheses on that if you're going to plug this into the calculator. Make sure you have all your parentheses. All right. Inside my parentheses, I'm going to do that first. The opposite of -2 becomes +2, so I have -7 plus 2, which is -5. And -5 times -5 is going to give me a positive 25. And our last one that we're going to go on here today, P is -3, C is -8. So again, replace P with parentheses, -3, minus, and parentheses, -8. Again, we have two negatives there. Don't mess up on that piece. It's a common mistake for students. I'm going to rewrite this. The first one doesn't change because there's nothing in front there, but negative makes that -8 the opposite, giving me +8. Again, negatives always make things the opposite, giving me a final result there of positive 5. Hopefully this is enough for you to do well with simplifying and evaluating expressions here at the expectation where we are for Chapter 2. Good luck.